Good afternoon, everyone. Allison Skybark here, Consolidated Planning Group. We are excited to bring today's webinar to you. We're excited to be partnering with Leona Filis. She has her own law firm that is nuanced and working with families with special needs. She also sits on the board for the Friends of Down Syndrome. So today what we're going to be talking about is the 8 steps to consider when raising a child with special needs. This is a brand new topic for us. We haven't presented this topic in the past, so you guys are in for a treat. As always, I always like to start off with a couple of housekeeping items. I know we have a few people that are still coming in. We are in webinar mode today, so we can't see you or hear you, but we do know that you are out there. And we always invite people to put their questions in the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box today for Leona, and we'll bring the questions up as they come. We take the questions throughout the presentation. And this webinar today is going to be recorded. It will live on our podcast in the future. If you're listening to us on a podcast, you can reach out to us at contact@cpgcares.net, and we will be happy to share a copy of the slides if you're listening on podcast. Everybody that is registered for today's presentation will get a copy of the slides, so I always mention that so you don't have to take notes on every single thing you hear. You'll get a copy of the slides, and you'll also get a link to the recording. Following the meeting, also, our recordings all live on our YouTube channel. At Consolidated Planning Group, we do a lot of webinars designed to educate and equip families with the tools and the resources that they need to be successful in planning for their loved one with special needs. And all of those live on our Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel, which will be in the slides, and I'll put that in the chat box as well. Consolidated Planning Group, we are a holistic special needs financial planning firm. We're nationally certified as Social Security advisors, members of the special needs planning community, and as well, we're an advisory and a consulting firm. So a lot of times there's confusion, Leona, on what we do and what a special needs attorney does. Sometimes they probably call you and ask the financial things, and they call us and tell us that they need guardianship or a special needs trust. And so I always like to make those lines clear of what we do and what, a special needs attorney does. And I always simplify it by saying that they're the paper, the legal documents, they're necessary, they're needed, and we're the money. How do we fund the trust? How much money do we need to fund the future care of our loved one with special needs? How do we maintain our eligibility for state and federally funded programs? Those are some of the things that we do. So we do a lot of advocacy. We help people set up ABLE accounts. We do transition planning, put protection plans in place, lifetime care plans. And I always mention, because I think it's very, very important, there's about 260,000 financial advisors in the U.S., and fewer than 0.1% of all financial advisors are nuanced and special needs. So that means there's about 125, 150 advisors in the entire U.S. that are nuanced and special needs. Your situation is specialized. It's really important that you work with a specialist. And the main reason for that is to maintain that eligibility for state and federally funded programs. People that are not nuanced in this, they don't understand those guidelines, and it's not because they're not smart, it's just because they're not educated in that, kind of in special needs. They can make recommendations that would cause you to lose benefits that you would otherwise be eligible for. So it is certainly my pleasure to have Leona with us. And having said that, I'm going to turn everything over to you. Leona, tell us a little bit about you.
Thank you so much, Allison, and thank you to Consolidated Planning Group for letting me appear here today. I've been looking forward to this for a while. Today, I wanted to talk to everyone about things that I considered when I had my son's diagnosis for autism spectrum disorder and ADHD, and then things that came to me around the time, over the next few years when I learned about different challenges that families face when they're trying to raise a child with special needs, but then also figure out their rights and responsibilities and plan for the long term, plan for the a way to care for their child for the rest of their child's life. So that's how we got started. I have one son, and I have a law firm in Houston, Texas, where we focus on helping families with children with special needs. I've been so fortunate to have a very good next door neighbor who is the executive director over at Friends of Down Syndrome. And we have our neighbor, her son, who does have Down syndrome. And we also, in our family, have a family member with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So different disabilities and conditions have affected many of our family members and loved ones. And it seems to be happening to a lot of families now. And a lot of families have these questions about what they can do to protect their child now and in the future. And some things you as parents can do for your children. And in some of these things, you have to rely on professionals. So I came up with this 8 steps to consider when you're raising a child with special needs, to try and give a little bit of guidance to families with children with special needs. So the very first thing, whenever I talk to someone and they tell me that they have a diagnosis for their child, I ask them if they put their children on the interest list for Medicaid waiver programs. And that's something parents can do on their own. So with this list that you're looking at right now, there's some things, like I said, where it's just parents. You can go ahead and check those tasks off. But some things you'll need to contact an attorney for. And so we're going to go over today a few things for you to consider for protecting your loved one. Next slide. Thank you. So again, first one, after you get a diagnosis, and I wish that doctors' offices would be more aware of their ability to step in and help you as parents get on the interest list for Medicaid waiver programs. There's a lot of information thrown at you at the very beginning when you have a child with a diagnosis. But one of the things is there are resources out there, and I'll talk to you about Texas Medicaid waiver programs.
And one of the things I like to mention here, because I know that in the special needs community, we're always, especially here in Texas, we're always throwing around, is your child on the list? Are they on the interest list? Are they on the waiver list? And I would say that a lot of families don't even know they know they need to get on the list, but they don't even know what the list is for. And so, the Medicaid waivers are really truly designed to waive off some of the cost of care of caring for an individual with a disability to keep them in home and community-based services. There are a variety of different waivers. One list that you get on is your local intellectual disability authority. That's how you get on the list. So for Harris County, for instance, that would be the Harris Center. You would call the Harris Center to get on the list. That's the HCS, Texas Home Living, Community First Choice, examples of those waivers. But what a lot of people do is they call their local authority, like for instance, Fort Bend is Texana, right? Texana Center is Fort Bend. So if you live in Fort Bend, that's where you would call. They think that their child is on all of the lists, but there's actually separate phone numbers for class, MDCP, deaf, blind, multiple disabilities. So having clarity on that, we do have an entire webinar dedicated to that and how to get on the list and who to call. But the one thing I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows is that there are separate phone numbers, there are separate lists, and if you call only your local authority, you are not on all of the list. Okay.
Yes, that's true. So when I first heard about it myself, and I was in the middle of researching all the different challenges that I was facing with my child and in autism, all I heard was the word Medicaid. So I had a consultant that said, "Oh, do you have your child on the list, on the Medicaid waiver list?" And so I didn't do anything about it because I was busy doing other things. I think Allison, you and I spoke a little bit earlier saying those first couple of years, and maybe longer. You're up till 2 a.m. researching different challenges and potential tips and that can help maybe your child have a better life, have a better day even. And so with all of the research that you're doing, you kind of put aside things that may not apply. And I thought Medicaid won't apply. But it wasn't until months later when I went to a seminar and I found out that usually the waiver programs, they waive the financial eligibility aspect that you would typically see with Medicaid. So for a lot of our families, they're not going to receive benefits from the government because their household income or their assets exceed what's allowed for eligibility. For Medicaid, it's $2,000 of assets, and then they have different ways of calculating income. And they look at household assets and household income until you're 18. So we don't receive a lot of relief as families if we have a child with special needs. But with the waiver programs, most of these, there's about half a dozen of them. And like you said, half of those are administered at the state level, and then half of those, the other half are administered at the local level. So yes, Harris Center is the place to call if you live in Harris County. It used to be called MHMRA. So some people are more familiar with that name. But what you want to do is go ahead and sign up. And you'll see on our next slide, we do have a phone number for CLASS. CLASS is a really good waiver program. It's called Community Living Assistance and Support Services Program. And that is administered at the state level. It used to be administered by DADS, Department of Aging and Disability. So some people recognize that, but now it's through HHSC. And this particular program is really good for families that have children on the spectrum. There's a lot of specialized therapies that are available to people that are on this particular program. Some of the special therapies, let's see, on the next slide, you'll see some of the services that are allowed and offered through the CLASS waiver program. Now, this would include minor home modifications, medical supplies, respite care, dental work, and then dental sedation. And that is a very big, there's a lot of families who have a need for dental sedation whenever they bring their child in for dental work. But the specialized therapies is what sets CLASS aside for families on the spectrum. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there are different therapies such as aquatic therapy, massage therapy. There's usually comorbidity if you have autism. There's a comorbidity with, let's say, anxiety. Generalized anxiety disorder is very prevalent. And you can, with the CLASS waiver, get therapies such as music therapy, massage therapy, getting them outside and getting recreational therapy, horseback riding therapy. Now, hippotherapy, Allison, are you familiar with that one?
I am not.
Hippotherapy is horseback riding therapy, but combined with another therapy. So there is a theory that the horseback riding, the connection with the horse, the movement, all of that allows the child, let's say on the spectrum, to be readily receptive to another therapy, let's say OT or something, or speech therapy. So there's all kinds of benefits that come with these Medicaid waiver programs, and they're free. But there is an issue that that our state in particular has. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that for these waiver programs, there are long waits before you're off of the interest list, the waiting list. And CLASS is the one that we were just talking about. Allison had mentioned deaf-blind with multiple disabilities. Just going across the top line, there's home and community-based services, medically dependent children's program, Star Plus, and Texas Home Living. If you look at this, you'll see how long it takes to come off of these interest lists. Now, you can only receive benefits from one program at a time. And with my son, he's already come off of the interest list for MDCP twice. He hasn't come off of any of the other lists. And what happens is MDCP is for medically dependent children, more so like I've seen children with, let's say, Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And they have specialized medications where if they miss a dose at a particular time, they may have to go to the hospital. Or you may have a child who's on a respirator. So when my son, who's on this waiting list, comes off of the list and we get the letter that announces, oh, we can schedule an appointment, I decline and ask to be put back at the bottom of the list. And this is something that I suggest to parents. Your child may not be eligible for MDCP at the time that you're coming off of the interest list, but just get back on the bottom of the list because you don't know what will happen before they turn 18. And so you don't want to say goodbye to those services completely. And so that's one thing that I recommend to people. But yeah.
And I think high level of care needs for MDCP, a child that has the inability to perform activities of daily living, think trach, think G-tube, think ventilator, other adaptive equipment and things like that, those are the ones that are a fit. But Leona, you hit the nail on the head. And not to spend too much time on the waivers. I know we talk a lot about waivers on a regular basis, but I think the key is because in Texas, all states are not the same. Some states don't have a waiting list. But because the waiting list is so long in the state of Texas, that is why there is such an urgency in people asking you, is your child on the list, and how important it is to get your child on the list and make sure that they're on all the lists. So if you know for a fact that you've called the Harris Center or whoever your local authority is, but you're not sure if they're on the class MDCP list or whatever, you're going to want to call that class number to make sure, because I think what happens, and I know as a parent myself, Leona, as a parent, life gets busy. I call it the relentless pursuit of information for our kids. That's why there's so many people that attend these webinars all the time, because we're always trying to learn more and grow our knowledge on how we can help our kids. Things get busy and we think we're on one list and then we're not. And then you're like, wow, I did that, 9 years ago. I thought I was on this list all that time. And so you're kind of starting from there at that point.
Right. Yes. Another one of those important programs that you were talking about is home and community-based services. That's more appealing to families who may have a child with Down syndrome, for example, where you might want to have rehabilitation services provided to them, or even a group home. Next slide, please. One of the key qualifiers for this particular program is the IQ, quote, the IQ level must be at 70 or below 76. And this does not, with this program, parents' income do not get considered. So again, they're waiving the right to they're waiving the income determination for eligibility. So if you go on, you'll see that again, there's day have, there's nursing services with HCS and therapies. And on the next slide, you'll see there are a couple of numbers that are provided, and it will be the main number to the state on top. And then if you are in Harris County, there is the number to the Harris Center. And now you might want to say, well, what are they going to ask? Well, when I signed up my son years ago, we were asked, what was his social name, date of birth, mailing address, phone number, and then the diagnosis. And then one of the questions that surprised me was, are you aware of the length of the wait? So yes. some of these services are, if they're still in school, if it's public school, you will be able to receive speech therapy, OT, and PT. So if you are able to obtain those services from the public school, then you have to wait to receive those services from the waiver program until after your child is done with school. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see that as of June 30th, 2023, there were 81,000 people on the waiting list for CLAS, Community Living Assistance Support and Services. For our kids with Downs, if they're looking for home and community-based services, there are, let's see, there are 116,402 people on the waiting list. So it is staggering. So it is important to get.
Do you have any insight? I know I don't have insight on this. Do you have any insight on any potential changes to the law in Texas or changes? I mean, obviously, Texas has to know that they have a problem. This is a problem comparatively to other states and other state Medicaid waivers. I mean, we jockey between 48th and 50th of the worst when it comes to the Medicaid waivers as far as the waiting list is concerned. Do you know of anything on the horizon that is, you know, possible changing in this landscape going forward? Have you heard of anything?
No, I have not. But in the past, my understanding is that a group of parents that had children who were on the waiting list for DBMD, deafblind with multiple disabilities, they went to Austin and petitioned for more slots to be opened for for the people on the waiting list for this particular waiver program. So they were able to effectuate change by contacting their Congress people, state reps.
For sure. I've got a question in the chat box. I'll get you the number for the Brazoria County LIDA. So Local Intellectual Disability Authority is what the LIDA stands for. So I will get that to you. I think that that's, you know, a question that comes up. I mean, anything can change, and we, you know, I can look at Colorado, for instance. They were bad. They had a very long waiting list for their waivers as well. And then later they legalized marijuana, and they got every single person off of their waiting list. So it was like it went for many, many, many years. And I'm not saying Texas should do that. I'm simply saying that things could change where the budgets change drastically, and then, you know, things could change. So basically almost overnight, where there were, you know, hundreds of thousands of people on their waivers list, they came off the list. So you know, I always am hopeful that maybe one day see that in Texas as well.
Well, you saw from the other chart that there were hundreds of thousands of people on the list, and last year our legislature just allotted 1,550 slots. So there can be a change, but we need to, I guess, that's a whole different presentation, but it can happen, like you said, like it did in Colorado. If you have the next slide, please. Okay, one of the things that a lot of people do not know about is the Get Hip program. If you have a family member who you cover on your employer-provided insurance, and they are on Medicaid, whether it's traditional Medicaid, like when your child turns 18 and qualifies for SSI and Medicaid on their own, or if it is from the waiver program where they get Medicaid. If you cover a family member on your employer provided insurance, you can see with the HIP program, if you can get a reimbursement check every month for the amount of the premium that is taken out of your paycheck every month. So the thought process is the state of Texas will cover medical bills for someone on Medicaid. And through this Medicaid, through this HIP program, they will pay for a family member to keep that Medicaid recipient on the employer provided insurance, and then just pay them the premium that's been taken out of their paycheck, not just the portion of the premium that covers the individual with Medicaid, the whole premium. So that is something to look into once you do come off of the interest list for Medicaid waiver programs.
So can we just talk about that for a second? Because I know for us, I personally have not done HIP with my kiddos. How painful is it? It's like, is it worth it? Okay, you're going to get the reimbursement of your insurance premium, but if you have to sit on the phone for 10 hours to get it, like, do you have any experience on that and if anybody that is listening today is doing HIP and it has had a good or bad experience, if you want to put that in the chat box and share with others, can you talk about that, Leona?
I don't have experience with it just yet because my son's still on the waiting list. But every parent that I've talked to and sent them to the website to get more information, whoever they talk to from the HIP program makes it very simple. Now, if you don't take your child to the doctor or they don't have medical bills that would exceed how much your reimbursement check would be every month, then the state of Texas may deny you. But I believe that Jay in the chat is saying that it's easy and simple to get into the program. And then my understanding is you send them a copy of your pay stubs showing how much was taken out every month, and then you get your reimbursement check. So that could save hundreds of dollars.
It could save a lot. I mean, yeah. A lot of times people are paying a considerable amount for their health insurance. So that is a very good point. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks. Now, another thing to think about when you are going through your journey as a parent of a child with special needs is to consider whether or not your child needs a determination of intellectual disability. Now, what I have seen parents do is contact the local authority like the Harris Center. And on the next slide, we have that some of these waiver programs, especially I think the home and community-based services, has a requirement that the person applying must have an IQ tested at 75 or below. So one of the things that I would suggest is to go ahead and contact the Harris Center and see about getting your child's determination of intellectual disability taken care of through them for free before they're 18, so that when your child does come off of the interest list for home and community-based services, you have the IQ ready, because of your meeting for the home and community-based services interview is in a couple of weeks. You may not be able to get the IQ from the Harris Center timely. So go ahead and
we have heard that they're backed up. A lot of the local authorities, I can't speak for all of them or actually any of them, but that a lot of them are backed up on that testing. So if you called today and said, I need this, it might be 6 months or a year before they get you in for the testing. We've heard that lately post-COVID. The other thing that I wanted to ask you is, it's true on the IQ determination for a lot of these waivers, we have heard repeatedly 75 and below with multiple disabilities, or 70 and below with a single disability for the HCS, Texas Home Living. Basically, most of the waivers, for the exception of class, not having that IQ determination. So can you talk more about that 76 and below? Is that for people that have like more than one diagnosis? If the primary diagnosis is an intellectual disability, are they looking for 70 and below?
Oh, I don't know the specifics about that. My understanding is that out of the half dozen programs, home and community-based services is the one that has the requirement for the intellectual disability for 75 and below. I didn't think that was a qualifier for the other programs, but that's kind of some of the homework to do whenever you're a parent, to call and get on all of the interest list, whether you think your child is qualified or not. Now, of course, don't get on deafblind with multiple disabilities if your child doesn't meet that requirement, those requirements. But for all the other programs, sign them up on the interest list and wait it out.
Leslie Lawson with Family to Family is out here today. Hi, Leslie. Glad you're here. She said also if the DID is more than 5 years old, they will sometimes make you do it again. Jay says some has to do it every 3 years. Does the IQ score evaluated by the public school qualify? They'll look at things, but they're going to do their own evaluation. And the thing is to Leona's point, when it comes to these waivers, don't look at it right now. Look at it later, okay? Because things can change. We've seen kids that were on the autism spectrum that IQs were much greater than 75, okay? They were, we could use the term freaky smart. But then we've seen where things changed later and they were diagnosed with schizoaffective or schizophrenia or other things like that. So while once their IQ was above that, later when they were tested again, it was below. We've seen things where things were clipping along and they were okay, but then there was an accident or a traumatic brain injury or something like that that happened along the way that changed things. So that's why we say to go ahead and get on the list. Don't get in the semantics of whether or not they qualify now, because it's not a matter of them qualifying now. It's you prove your eligibility at the time that they come up on the list, and that is really the key.
Perfect. Good. Yes. So we've done all this work. Let's pretend we have signed up for every waiver program. We've investigated whether or not the family would qualify for SSI and Medicaid. And now we're at the point where we're looking to the future. You have assets. Your child may eventually have assets. And so to meet the eligibility requirement that deals with financial assets for a lot of these programs, you want to make sure that you protect that eligibility by protecting those assets. And we have a way to do that called using a special needs trust. Some people call it supplemental needs trust. And so at the next slide, we have some information about what it is that you can do to understand what a special needs trust is. So you can talk to an attorney. You can become a trustee of a special needs trust for your child. So what you would want to do with a third-party trust is go ahead and contact an attorney who deals with special needs laws, special needs scenarios, that understands the different types of trust. And a third-party special needs trust is what you utilize when you have assets that you want to protect and pass on to your children. So with Consolidated Planning Group, let's say you've come up with a wonderful financial packet, but you want to go ahead, you want to pass on this inheritance to your children. And let's say you have 3 children and one has special needs, and that child may be eligible or will be eligible for benefits in the future. Well, if they have an asset that exceeds $2,000 in value, then you may have just qualified your child by letting them inherit something that exceeds the $2,000 cap. So what you do is you go to an attorney, you go over your plans, the lifelong plans for your child, and you decide who do you want to have in charge of your child's assets and money when you pass away. So as a parent with a child with special needs, I would be the initial grantor. I would fund the trust. I would be the grantor. I would also be the initial trustee. I would manage the trust. And then my child will be the beneficiary. And we have some families that have multiple family members with special needs. And yes, you do need a separate third-party supplemental needs trust per individual. These types of trust are not very difficult to set up, but you can't go to just a typical trust attorney if they don't understand the specific language that needs to be put into the supplemental needs trust and the whole purpose of the trust. The trust is for you as a parent to be able to pass on assets to your child so that they can have the benefit of those assets, but also the benefits from the government.
We have several things going on in the chat box I just wanted to talk about. One person said, in my experience, I had an individual had a DID that noted autism and borderline IQ, and then the next year had another one that rendered a mild IDD diagnosis and referenced previous DID for autism diagnosis, and they didn't qualify for a diversion slot. So one thing I will say, reach out to us. We may be able to provide some guidance on that. One thing that we didn't talk about is a crisis diversion slot. There are such things as crisis diversion slots for the HCS waiver. And what that crisis diversion slot basically is moving from a 17-year wait list or however much longer you have on the list to you get the waiver right now. It's only for HCS. And this is for an individual that is a threat to themselves or others, or is at risk of being placed outside the home. It could be because a parent has been diagnosed with something horrible, and now as a result of their own diagnosis, they can't provide the caregiving services that they once did, and now the kid is at risk of being placed outside the home. You could be caring for an aging family member. There could be a death of a spouse. All of those things are reasons for crisis slots, and we can help with that. So I just wanted to mention that. Leslie Lawson with Family to Family. Guys, if you guys don't know Family to Family Network, you absolutely should. You should totally Google that. They're a wonderful organization we refer to often, and Leslie is with them. And I love talking to Leslie. She's full of information. Leslie is a parent herself, but also works with Family to Family. For the HCS full-scale IQ of 69 or below, or full-scale IQ of 75 and below, and a primary diagnosis of a related condition, mild to extreme deficits and adaptive behavior. So that's where we were saying 75 and below with multiple disabilities, and basically 70 or below, 69 or below with single. And then as it relates to the trust, because we are talking about trust right now, one person said, I believe that this needs to be irrevocable. Can you please confirm on whether it needs to be irrevocable or revocable when it comes to the third-party special needs trust?
Yes, they do need to be irrevocable. And one of the things that one of the ways that we fund these trusts is through life insurance and other financial planning vehicles. So you are the grantor. A lot of parents have these special needs trusts and they sit empty, and that's okay. You can get the taxpayer ID number. You can go to a bank and open up an account with a few bucks and just let it sit there. But for many of our parents, if we have extra money, we're spending it on therapies or something else. And so these trusts will sit empty until they're funded with the life insurance, or let's say you have payable on death accounts with your bank account, retirement accounts, you can put down, you can designate beneficiaries, and you designate the special needs trust, not that person. But once you put the assets into the trust as a grantor, you cannot take them back out.
One person says, do you need to redo a special needs trust if you move to another state, or the one from Texas would still be valid in the new state?
So typically these are still valid wherever you're living. Most states have something called full faith and credit, where they will acknowledge other legal documents or court orders that are from other states, foreign states, as long as they meet the requirements of that other state at the time of execution.
And then one person says that on the special needs trust, the IRS shuts it down if no activity on the special needs trust after 6 years. So from my perspective, I think it's okay. You get the tax ID for the special needs trust. It's an okay thing to open up an account at the bank and, have some money in there. Like, for instance, when a kid is getting SSI and grandma and grandpa give them $500 for graduation, that's income, right? So we could just, put that, you can put money into the special needs trust. But I am a fan, Leona, of funding the trust with life insurance and keeping the parents' assets nimble, right? Because they're the ones, the funder of all of this, right? And they're the ones that are going to be spending 25 to 35 years in retirement. So they need access to their assets while they're alive. Where we see that the trusts are largely funded ahead of time is when there has been a settlement, some type of settlement, or another family member, like a grandparent or something like that, passed away and left a large sum of money, is where we see that they might be funded, or the parents specifically have plenty of money that they know that they have enough money to fund their retirement and then some, and then they go ahead and fund it along the way. But I would say that there's not a right or wrong answer. And so there's another question out here. Are there requirements on how the money in the trust can be spent? There definitely are. And if you spend money on food and shelter out of a special needs trust and the individual is getting SSI, there is a 1/3 reduction to SSI. But I would say that what you can spend out of the special needs trust for the benefit of a person with a disability, would you agree that list is very broad? I find it broad.
Yeah, and my next slide has it, the quality of life expenses that are allowed for spending out of the special needs trust. And this, of course, is just a few things that you can spend the funds on. But it is important. Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, one person had a question on opening a bank account. How do you do that? Just go to the bank with the trust document and open the trust account. So that is basically what you do. Usually there's a certification of trust and you have the tax ID, proof of that tax ID, your own ID if you're the trustee. And I personally have not had issues of opening trust accounts at Bank of America or Wells Fargo. It's not something that they do every day, and it was a long process. It was painful, but they did it. And those are basically the documents that you need to do that.
And make sure that you talk to someone at the bank that understands you're not asking the bank to be the trustee, because that can happen too. And some of these special needs trust agreements, we have, let's say, parents are the grantors, parents are the initial trustees. And then I usually ask people to list maybe 2 or 3 successor trustees, because you want to plan out as a parent who's going to be in charge of your child's money in the trust until your child dies. So you want the trust to be in existence and run the way that you would like it run forever. And so what I would suggest is, you do name maybe siblings as successor trustees or good friends. But then if you want to, you can name a corporate trustee to manage the assets of your child special needs trust. And one of the good things about having a special needs trust agreement is that you share that information with the taxpayer ID number to all your family members. So they too can incorporate that trust into their estate planning documents or their change of beneficiary forms with their different investment accounts or retirement accounts, because the trust is a separate entity that can own a lot of assets. Okay,
some of the corporate trustees, a couple of things on that. We see Bank of Texas, we see Cadence Bank having special needs divisions that do a good job on corporate trustees. We tend to see that trusts that are going to have in excess of $1 million is usually recommended. I mean, unless you have somebody that has the financial wherewithal to run the trust, which some people do and some people don't, that if there's millions of dollars in the trust, you may want to consider a corporate trustee. Someone said, can you invest funds in a trust and stocks, bonds, etc.? Yes, you absolutely can, but the registration of the account would be the special needs trust for the benefit of said child, right? That would be the account registration. It would be a trust account registration, so you absolutely can do that. And another place, to this person's point, is the 529 ABLE plan. Someone says, are there any tax benefits for funds deposited into a special needs trust? Like, are the deposits tax deductible or the growth of the money? And I would say, no, there's no tax benefits. You need to distribute that income, or there's going to be extreme taxes. What is it, like 34, 37% if you don't distribute income?
So that's a good tax question. There's no tax benefit for the special needs trust. That would be something to look at a 529 bank account for. And on my next slide, that's step 4, to utilize both the special needs trust and a 529A savings account. So that's also called an ABLE account, and ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life, I think, experience. And on this particular type of account, the interest earned is tax-free. Now, 529A bank accounts, you can open one here in Texas or in any other state. Sometimes there's a fee involved if you are not a resident of that state. But this is just another way to save money, and you can choose a type of savings account where you can choose stocks to invest in with that type of account. On this slide, it says friends and families can contribute up to $16,000 per year. Actually, that number for the cap of how much you can contribute per year is tied to the IRS gift tax exclusion amount. So for 2023, you can contribute up to $17,000 per year. Now that sounds great. And then let's say you have your $16,000 that has been contributed in this year. And plus that, you have the interest that's been earned. You roll around and you do this for a few years and you get close to 100,000. That's when you need to move that money over into a special needs trust, because only the first $100,000 earned in a 529A bank account, only that first $100,000 is shielded from Social Security looking at that amount and not counting it as an asset. So when
I think of this more of a saving to spend account, because $100,000 is never, ever going to be enough money to fund the future care of your child. So I think of this as a saving to spend account. The reason we have the 529A is because we can't have more than $2,000 in our kid's name, because we want to preserve their eligibility for the Medicaid waivers and for SSI, right? So when they're getting paid every month, we can move some of their money from, what they got paid in SSI to the ABLE account, but we can move that, have the money from the ABLE account to go back to their account and spend it in that month for their care. You can pay for food and shelter out of an ABLE account without a 1/3 reduction to SSI. And to her point, the 2023 number is $17,000, and it changes every year with that gift tax exclusion. But there is an additional $13,590 that you can put in each year on top of that 17 if your loved one with a disability is working. So there is an additional amount. But think save to spend. Don't ever get close to that $100,000. I mean, and when we think about our kids' care needs, you can pay for food and shelter. You could pay for transition. You could pay for medical care. You could pay for respite, attendance services, recreation. There's so many things. If it can be construed as achieving a better life for an individual with a disability, you can basically pay for it out of the ABLE account. So one says, so can you move money from the ABLE to the special needs trust? Yes. Okay, how does SSA, not SSI, affect, if any? If they're getting Social Security disability or childhood disability benefits under a parent's record, they're not looking at the assets for that program. However, if you still want to maintain your eligibility for Medicaid waivers, then you still need to meet those Medicaid guidelines. So you still want to keep less than $2,000 in the individual's name. So it's reasonable to continue to have an ABLE account for said individual if you intend to maintain your Medicaid eligibility.
Mhm.
Okay.
And a lot of people understand, they know about the college account, the 529 account, where you could save money and have tax benefits for putting money aside for your child's future tuition. So with the 529A bank account, yes, you can spend it on tuition, but there's other disability expenses which you're allowed to spend the 529A money on.
Yeah, I think that that's a valid point, because some people say, well, I have a 529C for my child and I don't know if they're going to go to college. You can convert up to $17,000 a year and an additional $13,590 to an ABLE account. And then that ABLE account would pay for college if they did go to college, but it would pay for a variety of other expenses. And make it to where you wouldn't be taxed and penalized to take the money out. Whereas if you take the money out of a 529C and don't use it for college, then you're going to be taxed and penalized on that. Someone says, how much does it cost to have a 529A? There are different programs. We help people set up programs all of the time. And you can start them out as low as you want, as little as $100 a month. And there's usually a front end load fee on those, and they're like usually 3.5. It's not an annual percentage. There's different programs. We're very familiar with all of the different programs out there. We do have opinions on which ones we would recommend, and we'd be happy to chat with you guys further about that. But the ABLE account, one thing that people say all the time is, why should I have a special needs trust and an ABLE account? If I could have an unlimited amount of money in a special needs trust and I could only have $100,000 in an ABLE account, and one of the main reasons is the ABLE account is one way. It's almost like a Roth, right? It's not a Roth, but it's one way that you can have money that is growing in tax-free distributions and, no taxes on that account. So that's one reason. It's the tax effectiveness of that. The other reason is because you can pay for food and shelter out of the ABLE account without a 1/3 reduction to SSI, whereas if you pay for food and shelter out of the special needs trust, there is a 1/3 reduction to SSI. Not saying that it's wrong. It depends on each individual. I mean, there have been times where we've made a recommendation that, yeah, go ahead and pay that out of the special needs trust. A 1/3 reduction is not going to be the end of the end of the line here, but that's a reason why people would have both.
And also you want both. If you want definitely the special needs trust for estate planning in the future, for the future care of your child, where you have a place to point people to put inheritance and any ownership interest in retirement accounts or bank accounts. If you're passing along anything of value to your child, put it in the third-party supplemental needs trust. And so I talk to parents about getting sufficient life insurance and disability insurance, but not just, one of the questions was if any money is left in the 529A, can it go back to the state? There is a MERP issue. MERP is Medicaid Estate Recovery Program, and assets in a 529A bank account are subject to the Medicaid Estate Recovery Program. So in the event that your child passes away and they had received benefits, Medicaid benefits, MERP can access the assets in the 529A bank account and get reimbursed for the payments that were made on behalf of that individual with the account. There is no payback provision with a third-party supplemental needs trust. There is a payback provision with a first-party supplemental needs trust. Just letting you differentiate about that. But one of the other
Can I just mention, one person asked about IRAs, 401ks, Roth IRAs, and stuff like that. Can our special needs child have that? Some of our kids do work and they have the options of 401ks, and the law isn't clear. It's very, very fuzzy, and some states don't count 401ks and IRAs for SSI and Medicaid purposes, and some states do. And the law here is very unclear, and we've actually seen some people lose their benefits because of it, and other people have had no issues having it. And so what our advice is I wouldn't go down that slippery slope because it's not clear. It's clear. They could interpret it however they want, and we've seen it interpreted both ways. So then it starts being a mess. So you're better off to just keep the money in a special needs trust or an ABLE account, and don't go down the slippery slope of does it count or does it not count on qualified money.
So for those two vehicles, those are definitely protected from Social Security Administration looking at it as assets. For the 529A, you can have up to, I think, 300,000 in the account, but only the first 100,000 is shielded from Social Security looking at it. So
yes, and that amount actually went up to 500,000.
Oh,
so
okay.
they'll say, well, I read that I could have 500,000 in an ABLE account. That's true, as long as you don't care about Medicaid and SSI. So you're going to want to keep those $100,000 limits that we're talking about, as long as you care about Medicaid and SSI. So that there is a little bit of misinformation out there. I know that we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Are you on this slide, or you want me to forward?
So we've talked about getting life insurance and disability insurance on both parents, the caregiver parent and the breadwinner parent. And a lot of people just think, well, I just cover the parent that has the job and the income, the breadwinner. But if you're a caregiver parent, if something happens to that person, you're going to need probably a team of people to pick up the slack. So I always suggest that both parents get disability and life insurance.
I always say this isn't your mother's life insurance anymore. Back in the 50s, where we only put insurance on the guy, especially when we have a parent that is a caregiver. Listen, moms and dads that are caregivers, you do this job for free. Guess what? Nobody else does. And also, not only do they not do it for free, they charge you a premium because your kid has special needs, because your kid has the higher care needs than what an average individual has. So I agree 1,000%. Now, one thing I want to tell you too is we also fund a lot of the special needs trust. There is a policy. So a lot of people have policies where they leave their each other, like spouses, the beneficiary, for income replacement, what have you, right? But then we have a second to die policy where after the second person dies, that second to die policy, they're much cheaper. We can help you with those things. The second to die policy funds the special needs trust. So those are some options, but I think it is smart. And I would say to do it before you get to a point in your life where you're uninsurable. Don't wait till you're 75 years old. Look at it, lock in your age at the younger age that you are in insurability.
Great. Yeah. And that's why estate planning is so important. And you can go on to the next slide. For our parents, you know that you should have your own will. And in your will, you acknowledge every member of your family. But for your child with special needs, you want their inheritance to go to the third party supplemental needs trust. And so that's something that parents can go and talk to an attorney about. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Yep. So why you can hire an attorney with estate planning knowledge, but you want to make sure that they understand how future inheritance could impact your child's eligibility for benefits. Next slide. Intestate succession, if you don't have a will and you pass away, depending on how you own the property, if it's categorized as community property or separate property, your child could inherit when you pass away without a will. And then with that asset that they've inherited, you could then have disqualified them for eligibility for benefits. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. We do talk to parents to let them understand that they do need to communicate with their schools to either get their child on Section 504 protection or special education. Next slide. Next slide. And keep on going to the last step is choosing guardianship or lesser restrictive alternatives. So when your child's getting closer to the age 18, if they have capacity to understand legal documents, then you should maybe look at getting a power of attorney for them. If they do not have capacity to understand legal documents, then you may want to consider guardianship. And at Filis Law Firm, we give you a free 30-minute initial consultation, and we can talk to you about your child's rights, their education rights, their potential guardianship. There's lots of topics that we covered today, and I appreciate having this opportunity with you, Allison, and with Consolidated Planning Group.
Leona, we're going to have you back to do a presentation with us. This is a great presentation, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here with us today. We do have full presentations about guardianship and the process, and everyone today is going to get a copy of these slides, so anything that we missed, you're going to get a copy of it, and it's also going to have Leona's contact information, how to connect directly with her here. But Leona, we're going to have you back to do a conversation on guardianship, because that is a big thing, and it really comes up from time to time. Guys, we've talked about a lot of things, and these are some things to keep on your radar. We do have webinars on every single one of these topics. So the thing is we talked about 8 things today, and those 8 things, we have complete presentations on those 8 things on our YouTube channel, because the thing is all of these things are a little bit more complicated. We go in depth and bigger questions and stuff on each one of those topics. So you can check that out on the Consolidated Planning Group YouTube channel. So that'll be the links to all of that will be in the slides. We'll also have a link for any upcoming webinars that you want to participate in that you can register for. We put those titles out there. I think we do it like a month in advance, so you can plan that. And our webinars are always from 12 to 1. Guys, it's been wonderful being here with you. There has been so much activity in the chat box and great questions. And Leona, it was certainly my pleasure to partner with you, and we will look forward to having you back again. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.